It's been years in the works and it's finally here. And if you've been there, it's probably something you've talked to your friends and family about already. I'm Andrew Thien, and this is Beat Check with the Oregonian. Up next, Michael Russell, restaurant reporter and critic for the Oregonian and Oregon Live. Yes, we talked about Kann, the best new restaurants of the year in 2022, what the latest trends are in this still recovering industry, and what may be yet to come in 2023. Here's our conversation. Michael Russell, thanks for coming back on the show.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me.
So, Michael, where are you right now?
I am walking north of Hollywood. I guess I'm getting close to moving toward Irvington now at this point. I'm trying to burn some calories after eating at many, many restaurants for our new restaurant guide.
That's obviously the reason we're talking. This is one of my favorite conversations we've done through the years, where I get to touch base with you and see kind of what you've been eating and what, you've got your fingers on the pulse of the food industry in this town. And before we jump into kind of your list for this year, I mean, we've had conversations throughout the years, Michael, about like various trends and whatnot. And I'm wondering kind of like, where are we at right now at this point in time? This industry has been battered by the pandemic, which we've talked about, but I mean, where are we at right now? Like, what's the kind of the overall picture from your perspective?
Well, I think it's a great time to be in the pop-up game right now in Portland, because there are a lot of empty restaurants out there from the pandemic, and a lot of them are being filled with, food carts that are looking to open restaurants or popular farmers market stands. I think I counted 5 of my top 10 new restaurants started as pop-ups. One was a cart. One was a farmer's market stand. One was doing pizza dinners for weddings in, Willamette Valley area. So there are a lot of landlords out there that are sick of not getting any rent on their spaces, and they're willing to take a chance on someone who might not have a ton of experience running their own business, which is probably not the way it was 3 years ago.
Yeah, I feel like when we were talking previously, like if we go back 3 years to when I think it was honestly the first episode of this podcast, it was basically all the superstars at the time of Portland dining, opening new spots, whether it was, or teaming up to open new spots, like Eam, for example.
Mm-hmm. That's right. Eam was Matt's Barbecue, and Earl Ninsom from, at the time he ran a restaurant called Padi and another one called Longbon. And there was a time when landlords would just, go get their leasing agent to open up the old Rolodex and go down. First, you'd call Andy Ricker and see if he might want to put a pock in your building. And then you'd call Gabriel Rucker and Naomi Pomeroy and on and on. A lot of those chefs don't even live in Portland anymore. Mm-hmm. Andy Ricker lives in Thailand. John Gorham from Toro Bravo lives in the sort of Central Oregon's Sun River Bend area, Redmond area. Mm-hmm. So, times have changed. And the places that you used to call and used to be like, oh, yeah, sure, I'll put a little Big Burger there. Those chefs and restaurant owners are not as interested in taking a big risk right now, which means there's a lot of opportunity. And, we're seeing, we can go down some of the names of the list, but again, like I said, good time to be a pop-up.
With that whole context in mind, let's just kind of push that aside for a moment and go straight to the top, I guess, for the restaurant that we've talked about, I think either a year or maybe even 2 years ago. And that is from a very well-known chef in town. Kann is your best new restaurant of the year. Obviously, this has been acclaimed from before it opened, but what's it like for people who haven't been there?
Well, I'll just go back in time a little bit to 2019. I saw a notice about a pop-up happening at Departure. Gregory Gourdet, who was the chef at Departure and also had appeared on Top Chef, and gotten all the way to the finals on that season 12. He was going to take a stab at cooking Haitian food. His parents are from Haiti. They moved to New York before he was born. He spent a little bit of time there when he was about 4 years old. But he'd gotten interested in the food that he grew up eating as a kid, and wanted to take a stab at it. So I actually went to that pop-up, and it was around that time that he announced that he was going to open a restaurant focused on Haitian food and leave Departure. So I think he's been planning it since 2018, maybe 2017.
Yeah.
And so that marks about 4 years. And yeah, hey, there's another restaurant that started as a pop-up. A little different in his case.
Yeah,
he's a bit better funded than some of the pop-ups out there.
Not every pop-up chef is, on TV and is a well-known figure outside of the Portland area. But
correct.
Yeah. So, obviously not everything can live up to the hype, but it seems like obviously you've got this place ranked as your restaurant of the year. Can you talk about why?
I don't know if there's any NBA fans among your listeners, but I'm going to channel Zach Lowe and say the difference between number 1 and number 2 is the same as the difference between number 2 and number 10 on my list. Kann was like the clear restaurant of the year. I like to maybe zig or zag when it's appropriate, and when, or zig when people are zagging. Like last year, Portland Monthly and Eater PDX both named Republica their restaurant of the year. It's a Mexican restaurant in the Pearl District, and I picked Magna Cucina, which was a Filipino restaurant that I really loved. And, I remain really happy with that pick. This year, I think we're all going to end up picking the same place, which is a little unfortunate, but I think the bottom line is there's just not a lot of money or ambition out there to open restaurants. And here's Gregory comes along. Like you said, he's probably the best known chef in Portland at this point. And he's been working on this for 4 years. He has a great strategy in place. He's got a lot of investors. He opened a beautiful dining room, and his vision for the menu is really ambitious as well. I sort of compared it in our restaurant of the year story to Haiti. Actually, the word barbecue comes from an indigenous word, the Spanish sort of transliterated to barbacoa. And, their concept of, putting meats on a rack or even burying them underground, that's kind of where we get our idea of smoked meats. So I think Kann it's more than this, but it is kind of like imagining a world where that Haitian barbecue tradition developed and developed and developed and became the envy of the world. His food, a lot of his food is focused on meats that are smoked and or grilled on this big fiery hearth that dominates the kitchen, that he then tops with like herbs and edible flowers and really, really beautiful things. The food is stunning. The dining room is stunning. And frankly, when you look around, a lot of the restaurants out there are real sort of cash-strapped, turnkey kind of operations. There's just no place in Portland that I would recommend people try to get into if they can, more than Kann, which of course is easier said than done.
Yeah, in one of your write-ups about Kann recently, you mentioned that it was kind of unlike anything Portland has ever seen, in part because of what you just described and the cuisine and the money, but it's also big. It's not the small dining room at Le Pigeon, for example.
Yeah, and we mentioned Earl Ninsom already. He has a place called Longbon that I remember writing when they opened that they were booked out for 6 months solid, but that was 24 seats a night, maybe 2 turns, 2 seatings. And Kann, I think they turn their tables 3 times. So that means like 3 parties will sit at a table in a single night.
Mm-hmm.
And they have something like 85 seats, 80 plus seats, plus private dining, plus a bar downstairs that last time I was there had a line around the block. And so they are just like, people are really coming through at a much higher rate than a place like Nodoguro, which is this really fancy Japanese restaurant. It's $250 a head. Yes, they sell out their tickets really fast too, but that's only 12 people a night, maybe 4 nights a week. Kann is doing, astronomical numbers. I think something like 4,200 seats a month, something like that. And they fly out the door. They drop them on the 2nd of every month, and they're gone within 5 minutes, or at least they were this month.
You mentioned earlier that you're not averse to zigging when others zag, and I'm wondering your thoughts. You mentioned before we started recording that this is already the most acclaimed restaurant maybe in Portland history. The Willamette Week did not have the same favorable review, and I'm just wondering what you thought when you saw that, and if you can expand on just the piece of this being the most acclaimed restaurant maybe in Portland history.
What's so funny about that is I think more people approach me about the Willamette Week review than anything else, more than my review, more than Portland Monthly's Restaurant of the Year, more than Esquire naming it the best new restaurant in America, which is a huge, huge honor. That's a crazy thing. But no, everyone wanted to talk about the cranky Willamette Week review. And, if you kind of boil down what Willamette Week was saying, they thought it was too noisy. They thought the food was too spicy in a way that wasn't pleasant. And maybe there weren't enough peaks and valleys to the spice. And that the layout of the tables, there's this one section of communal tables, is awkward. And the noise hasn't really bothered me. I think if you go to a busy restaurant filled with people anywhere, it's going to be loud. It's sort of unavoidable. If you're someone who doesn't like loud restaurants, you're probably not going to enjoy it, though. If you don't like spice, you're probably not going to enjoy it. The communal table thing, they are a little awkward. They might want to, take one of those tables out and spread them out a little more or something. But, that means 2 less people get to eat there every night. And, it's already tough to get into.
That's money in the pocket, too.
Yeah. And I will, to get back just, to the negative review. I mean, I think that the points were valid. I think the way it was framed as saying that the restaurant was just all marketing and there's nothing behind it and Gregory's not a good cook. I think that is too far. And, I think was almost reactionary to the fact that it has gotten so much positive press and, that there is this big marketing budget behind it. And, it seems almost like a civic duty to love Kann right now, which I could see someone being upset about. But yeah, I mean, it's funny. I think about that Esquire, the fact that only 1 or 2 people brought up the Esquire thing to me. I remember when I started in this beat, it was 2011. I found out pretty quickly the Esquire critic, his name was John Mariani. He's still around, does a newsletter. He didn't even come to Portland. He had decided years before that he did not like farm to table cuisine. And he thought our servers were mean. And he also was someone who really liked to take complimentary meals. He liked to ask for comps in advance, stuff that a lot of critics like me don't do for ethical reasons. He was all about that life. Free hotel stays, free restaurant meals. So Portland was not really about it either. And he just never came here. He didn't come here for 7 or 8 years. And he missed out on Pock Pock and Beast and Ox and Le Pigeon and Toro Bravo, all these famous restaurants that not only were impactful for Portland, but actually influenced restaurants in Brooklyn and, Austin, Oklahoma City, all around the country. So it's been a huge change. And clearly not every national magazine has a restaurant guide. Not everyone ranks their list, but no Portland restaurant has ever been number 1 on the ones that do that in history. Huh. And that was Kann. They got that award and they're cleaning up the local stuff. They were in a New York Times, similar new restaurant guide really early on, 6 weeks in. And, I wrote in the guide that there's a good chance Gregory Gourdet wins a James Beard Award as the best new chef in the Northwest. He might win second James Beard Award for the best new restaurant. Bon Appetit has a restaurant guide next year they'll probably be in. Like, he's really cleaning up, in other words.
Yeah, no, you have laid a compelling case for any listener who hasn't been there, who hasn't risen to defend the honor of Kann on Twitter, which I thought was hilarious in the wake of that review. So,
the tweet, some of the tweets went a little too far too, didn't they? But if you only read Twitter, I think you would. Isn't this true at all times in life? But if you only read Twitter, I think you'd have a totally different opinion of what that review said. I mean, I think you wouldn't understand it at all. I think you'd think the writer was I saw someone call him a white supremacist. I just like, can we just pause a second? Like, I think he just thought it was too noisy. Like,
Yeah. Well, we've probably exhausted that. It's
wait. I will say before we move on.
Anything else? Yeah, go ahead.
I did write a guide to how to get into the restaurant because I tried my best to only get in like a civilian would. Like, I am known to the restaurant. I'm known to Gregory. Therefore, I'm known to his staff. They told me early on I could text a number and that I could probably get in with a little bit of advance notice. But I didn't want to do that because I didn't want to not know how it felt like to watch a reservation that you had in your cart disappear by the time you click confirm, which happened to me last month. So yeah, I've got some tips there. They're the obvious things: arrive early, arrive late. Sometimes they'll squeeze you in. I tell you when to go to when the next reservation drops happen, and a few other tips. So you can find that, maybe Google how to get a reservation at Kann. That'll come up.
We'll share a link in the episode notes, but you're saying that it's easier to get into Kann than it is to get Taylor Swift tickets, for example.
Yeah. I think that's probably true. Yeah.
All right. So let's get to the guide. At this point, maybe we won't go through every single restaurant on the guide, but I kind of want to zero in on, I guess we started with number 1 and kind of want to go right to number 5 because that both works in terms of, symmetry in my mind, but also I'm familiar with the former occupancy of this space. Tell me about Gabbiano's.
Right. So Gabbiano's is a sort of a red sauce Italian restaurant, meaning they cook Italian American food, specifically kind of what you think of as East Coast style Italian American food. A lot of marinara sauce on top of spaghetti and meatballs and chicken parmesan and things like that. It's, things are modernized a little bit, but it really is pretty respectful to the tradition of Italian American cuisine. And one of the things I really liked about it was that a bunch of Portland restaurants were trying to make that concept happen before the pandemic. Mm-hmm. And I went to all of them, and I thought all of them were either like too fancy or didn't really get it or were too expensive. And Gabbiano's, while it's not like cheap, I think spaghetti and meatballs, which is a pretty big plate, is $23. It comes with 3 big meatballs and a fair amount of spaghetti that they make in the restaurant. So while it's not like bone cheap, it is, I think they get the spirit of what makes Italian American food delicious and fun. And I happen to have married into a family where my father-in-law is Sicilian, so I have a lot of thoughts about this. My wife has even more thoughts than I do, and she's probably the most, the world's biggest meatball critic, at least in Portland. And even she liked the meatballs at Gabbiano's. So this is the place, like out of the top 10, I actually wrote, this is the place that I would go back to first on my own time and money. So it's kind of the shadow restaurant of the year in that sense. Because I'll probably go back there first. And
we mentioned Naomi Pomeroy earlier and Beast, and obviously this isn't right next door or a couple doors down from that old restaurant.
Yeah, I think it's like literally right next door. Yeah, and there was a place there for a long time called Yakuza, which was sort of Japanese, and maybe wouldn't open as such concept today because of the question of a cultural appropriation, but it lasted a good long time there. And then was empty for a while. There was a vegan Asian restaurant in there for a while. That went away. And the guys at Gabbiano's, I think they really have their finger on the pulse in terms of creating like a fun, lively restaurant that Portlanders are going to have fun at. The cocktails are awesome. So yeah, go to Gabbiano's, have fun, eat spaghetti.
Yeah. I'm sure your wife has thoughts on White Lotus season 2 then as well.
She's been busy. We haven't caught up on White Lotus season 2, but she's been watching a lot of Below Deck to zone out after work. And there is an episode of Below Deck Med where the entire White Lotus season 1 plot line about the rich lady who's mourning somebody, like absolute ripoff from Below Deck Med. So if you ever watch that show, you'll see that episode and you'll be like, oh my gosh, that's exactly where they got White Lotus from. Like beat for beat. It's incredible.
Well, let's just jump on the list to another pasta spot, maybe for some reason.
There's so much pasta. I gotta say, there's so much pasta. And I even got an email from a restaurant owner. Hey, how come my place wasn't on your list? I said, well, look, man, like there were maybe 8 new pasta places that opened and I'm doing a top 10. Like it can't all, I think Portland's appetite for pasta is, higher than mine for putting pasta places on my top 10 guide.
Portland's going to need a long walks, lots of long walks in 2023.
Indeed.
All right. But yes. Talk about number 10.
Number 10 is another pop-up, Pastificio d'Oro. This place started as sort of like a Monday only thing at a St. John's pizzeria called Gracie's a Pizza. St. John's, one of my favorite neighborhoods in the city. Spent many a happy night out there, but probably better known for their dive bars than their restaurants. Correct. Overall. And Gracie's a Pizza came along. They were doing, a really personal take on these wood-fired pizzas. And the owner there kind of reached out to these kids who were selling fresh made pasta on Instagram, invited them down. And the hook at Pastificio d'Oro is that they're not just making fresh pasta. They're they're making the dough by hand. They're rolling it out with this long wooden pin called a mattarello. They're then, forming the pasta by hand. They're not using any machines, no extruders, no sheeters, no things like even at a place like Grassa, which makes fresh pasta. Even there, you look in the window, they're using some machines. So this is like intense, hard labor, all done by hand, just like an Italian grandma might do in Bologna. And the folks up there, Chase Dobson and Maggie Irwin are their names, a very sweet couple. She makes this really fun, tangy dressing that goes with honey in it that goes on these great salads that everyone loves. Good wine. You can order cocktails from this bar next door. The pastas are fun. And they in November took over the space full time. So I feel a little odd putting full on pop-ups on my restaurant guide. I usually try to limit it to places that are open 4 nights a week at a minimum, just so that people can get in.
Yeah.
And, these guys really converted from a pop-up to a restaurant very recently. So I snuck them on, and it's worth a trip out there, which you can pair with a movie at the great St. John's Twin Cinema.
There you go. All right. Well, I didn't really intend to talk about pasta, but it did jump out from your guide. And, I'm a fan of a delicious pasta meal. So I guess that's why I zeroed in on that. But what else? I'll kind of leave it up to you. Anything else from your guide that you would want to highlight?
Yeah, I would recommend going to get a burger at Pasture, which is this sustainable deli on Alberta Street. Great burgers and sandwiches. They, house cure and brine their own meats. So they have relationships with farmers that do regenerative agriculture. That's great. I would recommend getting the fried chicken at Rangoon Bistro, which is a Burmese restaurant, but 2 of the chefs that own it met while working at an Italian restaurant in Malaysia. Hence some of the dishes on their menu, including this very Malaysian fried chicken that reminded me of Hat Yai, if you've had Hat Yai's fried chicken. But I actually prefer Rangoon Bistros because it's just a little juicier. But, Malaysia and southern Thailand share a very, very slim border. So, yeah, the flavor profile is similar. And then, Bluto's is Rick Gencarelli's Greek restaurant that's really more of a Mediterranean restaurant. and his like amazing flatbread and hummus. I just say, go in there, order flatbread, order hummus, order maybe some chicken skewers, and call it a day. So those are 3 other great options from the list. And you know what? Go read the whole thing. All the restaurants on there are good.
Well, yeah, JoJo is a favorite of my family's, especially my small children who like the burgers a lot. So, yeah, there's a lot on there for anyone to dive into. What about next year? Anything coming that you've got your eye on? I know we kind of talk about this where usually have an inkling of things that might be coming.
Yeah, that's a great question. Usually I've already written about a few places there. Oh, this place is coming in a few months, but the cabinet is pretty bare. And, not to end on a super downer note, but this was like a tough year for restaurants, and a lot of places opened and closed in a year. I mean, Sunshine Noodles was a sort of Cambodian noodle place that I kind of only fell in love with like last month, and then went 3 times in a row to order the same dish, which is called Lort Cha. And they will be gone by the time you're hearing this podcast. One of my absolute favorite restaurants of the year was this Mexican seafood pop-up in the back of Güero called Paradise Mariscos. It was so good. And I know the chef is working on something, so hopefully that comes to fruition. But at the moment, that is not even happening. So it was tough to find the sort of 25 restaurant nominees that I put together a couple months back. And the top 10 I thought was pretty solid, but usually I'm able to come up with like 40 or 50 new restaurants that I really like. And then I pick from those. And, that was not this year by any stretch of the imagination.
You think the fundamentals we talked about at the beginning, Michael, where, you're going to have these vacant spaces and kind of scrappy underdogs getting a chance, you think that's still going to be the case going into 2023, or are we pivoting?
I just said, I'm not even going to answer your question here, but I just had this memory of going by this barbecue place that had gotten written up, not by me, but I went over there. I ordered a few things and I was on my bike. So I said, can I get a bag? I'll put it in my basket. And the chef goes, oh, we don't have any bags. Here, I got you. And he takes out a roll of like masking tape and just like wraps the 3 like, cartons of food together into this like tight bundle, where it was like, like cinched together in the middle, like a belt. And then I rode home on my bicycle and like little bits of macaroni were flying out onto the street. And anyway, that restaurant did not make it through the year, but rest in peace. You want to say your question again, or should we just leave it at that?
I think we should leave it at. I kind of like that. Yeah. It's kind of a metaphor, maybe, of where we're at. Well, enjoy your walk, and thanks for taking time to talk.
Need 20,000 steps a day to burn off those calories, man. I did go to about 75 restaurants, basically in late September through early November. So, ready to not be doing that anymore for a little bit.
All right. Well, thanks for doing all that and conveying it all to us here as you walk. Appreciate it.
Someone's got to do it.
Thanks for listening to Beat Check with the Oregonian. I shared links to Michael's restaurant guide in the episode notes, including how to get into Kann if you're lucky. If you like this show, give us a 5-star rating and review in Apple Podcasts. It really helps people find the show. And tell a friend. Help spread the word. The best way to support our journalism, like our unrivaled look at the restaurant scene in Portland each year, is with a subscription to Oregon Live. You can do that at OregonLive.com/pod support. Until next time.